We are going to be recording this session, so please know that you can have the choice of at the end using your voice and talking to me, or if you prefer, you can put any comments or questions you have inside the chat box, and then Lindsay will be happy to interrupt and ask me your question. But for now, I'm going to take over your screen and I'm going to show you some slides. Give me just a second while I do that. First thing we're going to be talking about today are the laws and the regulations. I do strongly suggest that you read these for yourself. There is some conflicting information out there. It's just going to give you some peace of mind when you're talking with your family, that lady from the grocery store, or someone in the school system. It really comes down to a history lesson, and the most important thing from as far back as the 1600s is that Roger Ludlow wrote a code of law. He did this in 1650, and in it, it clearly states that the responsibility of education is the parents. So he had a few more things to say, but let's move forward in time. If you've spent any time in Connecticut at all, you're somewhat familiar probably with the story surrounding the Charter Oak. It's a really interesting and involved story, but what is important to know for this topic is that during that time period, there were lots of people who were having input about what the laws should be and what people needed to do. And at the end of that, they really conflicted with each other. So they decided as one to cut everything out that happened after 1694 and then solidified everything before that, making Roger Ludlow's code our basis for all the laws that were going to come in the future. So now, if you were going to look up the duties of the parents, you would find them in section 10, 184. And until 1872, all it said was that it was the parents' responsibility to educate their children. And then Roger Ludlow included at that time a list of things that he felt it was important for you to cover. Now, in 1872, there was a push nationwide towards public education, and the laws changed. If you were to look at them today, this is what you would see. Now, this part that I've highlighted on your screen, all of this is about who tried to make changes, whether or not they were successful, and this is not really important to what we're talking about today, so I'm going to take that part away. Here you'll see is what the main part of the law looks like, and this first sentence is what we've already talked about. All parents will instruct or cause their children to be instructed in a list of things that Roger Ludlow thought would be important. Now, it wasn't until 1872 that we saw our first change, and that brings us to this part of the law. And basically, this is an if-then statement, because education being the responsibility of the parent, the first question is whether or not you will do it yourself. And historically speaking, you will always have had the opportunity to send your children to parochial school or private school. But with this push towards public education, that became an option as well. And this part of the law states that your children between the ages of about 5 to about 17 or 18 have school as an option. Now, I have put in bold on your screen here the idea of receiving equivalent instruction. And that's going to come back to us as we move forward with our discussion. So, in 2011, they did add a couple of changes, basically saying that if your child is 17 or older, you may withdraw them from school to go to college, to work as an apprentice, these kinds of things. And so at 17, you no longer have to go to school if that's your choice. Likewise, if your child is 5, you can defer school for a year. And as well, if you are 6, you can also defer it for a year. So if your child is 5, you can defer it twice for a total of 2 years. But if your child is 6, you may only defer it once, because the children must be in school again, if you are choosing public school, by the time they are 7. I don't mean to confuse you. You can homeschool your children as long as you like, and then you can enroll them in. But 7 is the latest time that they can join in with kindergarten. And this is basically it. That's all the laws as you see them. There's a couple of other pieces that are placed in other places within the law codes. But as far as duties of the parents and education, that's it. The responsibility, whether or not and how you educate your child, is up to you. So your first choice is whether or not you will homeschool. And then after that, whether or not you will allow someone else to do it, or who you will allow to do that. So as clear-cut as that can be, it does get confusing when we start talking about the C14 guidelines. And I do want to stress that these are not laws. They are just guidelines. They've been in effect since 1990, and this is how schools are told that they should interact with people who are going to be homeschooling. I do want to point out that this document I'm showing to you today, I've copied it exactly and pasted it into the document, with the exception of my little editorials here on the right-hand side. I have made some of the words bigger for ease of reading, but the first thing I'd like for you to call your attention to is this requests from parents to educate their children. Remember, the law says that it is your responsibility to see that your child is educated, and so you do not need to request anything from the school system in order to do that. It is the law that it is your right. Now, having said so, I'm going to fast forward here to the next part of their document, where they say that you shall cause your children to attend public school regularly. And here we come to that idea of equivalent instruction. Within the school system, because they've switched that second sentence with the first sentence in our if-then statement from the law, then from their point of view, you need to provide equal instruction to what they could be offering at school. But remember, this isn't precisely the case. There's much more flexibility and choices afforded to you because, again, it's your responsibility. Now, there is some language in here where it says things like parents must show equivalency described, and then we come to that list of things that Roger Ludlow put forth. So, moving forward, these are the things that the school system is potentially going to tell you, or anyone else who's familiar with these C14 guidelines. Notice at the top here, it does say that these are suggested procedures. And then you can see here listed in A that parents must file with the superintendent of schools a document that's called a notice of intent. So here we have our first real conflict, because these are suggested procedures, and yet they're telling you that you must fill out this piece of paper. And so this is where the first conflict really comes in. You do not have to do this. You can if you would like to. There are some reasons you might want to. Many people, many homeschool families actually don't fill out this notice of intent, and that's your legal right. Now, B through E listed on this page, all of this information is about how you would do this and where and when. I'm going to let this go aside while we talk a little further about what comes with a notice of intent. So here in F, you'll see that there is an annual portfolio review. It's held with the parents and a school official, and basically what you do here is you bring in one piece of paper per subject that shows that you covered it within the school year. So if, for example, you use workbooks, then you can bring in one workbook to show that you covered math, one workbook page that shows that you discussed language and grammar. Having one piece of paper can seem like a scary affair, but really you're just They're just determining that you gave your children instruction in those topics. Your children are not going to be graded on it, and neither are you. Will not determine whether or not you have the ability, just determining whether or not you have fulfilled what you said, you are going to do. I also want to bring your attention to G here, where it says refusal by the parent to comply with this reasonable request of filling out an NOI can result in your child being considered truant. Now, this is a false statement. As you can see here, I have added General Statute Section 10198A, where basically what it says is that in order to be considered truant, you have to be absent from a school that you are enrolled in. If you are homeschooling, you will withdraw your child and they won't be enrolled in that school, and therefore they can't be absent from that school. Without being absent, they also cannot be truant. So I don't want you to worry about this at all. So what is an NOI? Again, I've taken this from one of their websites, and you may have it look exactly like this. I've changed it so it will fit on the screen. And there may be some additional information because each superintendent gets to put on it what they need and feel is important. But on all of them, you are going to have the student's information, the number of days that you will be instructing, what method of assessment you are going to be using, progress. You're going to schedule that annual portfolio review, and then you and the superintendent will sign it. Even if a notice of intent doesn't look like this, or even isn't called specifically a notice of intent, if the document requires that you and the superintendent sign it, then it likely is functioning as a notice of intent. Now, a notice of intent is only good for 1 year. If you're going to be homeschooling for more than 1 year, you can choose to fill out the notice of intent or not this year, and it is not going to affect whether or not you do it next year as well. So you will not be penalized either way, even if you change your mind and decide to do the other. Now, you'll also see on the screen that list of required things that comes down from Roger Ludlow's code: reading, writing, spelling, grammar, geography, arithmetic, history, and citizenship. You'll also notice that there are some recommended topics that include science and then any other thing that you feel is important. Remember, if you fill out this notice of intent and you have your portfolio review, you will need to bring documentation showing that you covered each of these things. Now, should you fill out a notice of intent? Now, this is a really personal decision. There are some homeschoolers that do, and they've enjoyed the process. There are many homeschoolers that do not. But how do you know in these times whether or not this is for you? So I've come up with this list of questions, and if you answer yes to 2 or more of them, I would suggest that you consider filling out the notice of intent. However, if you answer no to 2 or more of these questions, then I would put forth that you consider not filling out the notice of intent. But please remember, it's your choice, and whatever you choose will work for you. So please take some time to read the guidelines yourself, print them out if that works for you, save a copy on your phone. Knowing your rights is going to make all of these pieces easier, and becoming conversant in them will make you feel more confident and the people that you are talking to as well. With that in mind, I have collected places where you can find this information. Please feel free to take a screenshot or to take a picture of them with your phone, whatever works for you. But I do strongly suggest that you read the language for yourself. And it's a lot, right? But we're not quite done yet. If your child is enrolled in school, then you're going to need to withdraw them. You probably enrolled your student at kindergarten or when you came to Connecticut and enrolled in whatever grade your child was going to be in. Because you enrolled them, you will need to withdraw them. You can get a template online, or I have a slide, the very next one, that's going to give you an example of what that looks like. Please keep it simple. It doesn't need to have a lot of information on it. You do need to include your children's name, your child's name, that you are withdrawing them from their school, whether that's part of the public school or a private or parochial institution, and you will need to put on the effective date. I've heard some stories about people forgetting to sign it, so I've included that in the list as well. You should know that this withdrawal letter is different from your notice of intent. So if you decide to fill out that NOI, you will additionally need to do this as well. I do suggest that you send this information, this formal letter, receipt, certified letter, receipt returned. And I have some information on that in the next screen as well. So here's my example. I do like when people put in the name of their superintendent, but if you can't find that, then just saying "Dear Superintendent" is fine. Also notice that I have included a sentence where it says that your child will be instructed in accordance with the law. Lots of people feel that this helps the reader to know that you understand what your rights are. You should definitely sign this, and then it's perfectly good for your partner to also sign this. You only need one signature, but it's nice when both parents can put their name on the document. In the green square, I have put forth how to do the certified mail form and the return receipt form. These things, you get a sticker, you put that to the outside of the envelope, and then you get information back about when it was delivered and who signed for it. You can just keep these things with your records. You will probably never need them, but it's always nice to have. If your child isn't enrolled in school, then you don't have to withdraw them from that. I will say that if you have multiple children and one of them is in the school system and one of them is not, then you only need to create a letter for those children that are enrolled. Also, I think that it's nice for you to put one child's name on each letter. So if you have 2 children, write 2 letters. You don't need to send them separately. You can put those in the same envelope because they're going to the same place. But you enrolled them separately, you should withdraw them separately as well. That's my opinion. Some people put multiple children's information on the same letter, and it's okay to do that. I just like the paper trail, each having its terminus. So the next step, I hope, is relaxing and looks like this. If you give me just a minute, I'm going to toggle my screen so that we can talk about our next topic, which is, what is homeschooling? Where do I start? And how do I know what to do? So if you've done any type of research, you've already noticed that there are a lot of different kinds, and there are a lot of different questions to answer about these things. And all of this is important, but this is not the first thing that I suggest that you do. It sounds kind of weird, but the first thing is something that we in the homeschool community call deschooling. And it's summertime, so it's quite possible that you've already started this process. It looks a lot like this. And what we're asking you to do is really think about, what is education? What does it look like? What does learning look like? For those of us who have gone to school, a lot of times that can feel like desks all being in a row and a rigid schedule and pencils being sharpened, right, for September. But those things are the trappings of school, and they're fun, and they can offer you some great platform on which to place your education. But by spending time really noticing what your patterns of behavior are, can really be informative as to what type of learning works best for you. Does you or your family spend a particular time of the day quiet? Do you read in the morning or the afternoon? Is that an evening activity for you? What kind of activities do you all enjoy? And when you find something of interest, how do you find out more about it? Do you go to books? Do you go to YouTube? What are your methods and tools for gaining new information? While you are taking note of this, not just for your children, but for yourself as well, I suggest that there is a second step to this figuring out process. And I call that step delving. It can be overwhelming, but there are ways to frame it to make it easier for you. The first thing is to consider what the learning styles are of each person in your family, all of the people who are going to be involved in your homeschooling experience. So maybe one of the grandparents is going to be talking about history or language arts. Get them to consider what their learning styles are as well. Now, your learning styles don't have to match, but this is important information for you to have because whatever way you learn best is also the way that you will teach best. If that doesn't match with what it is that your children do, then knowing that ahead of time, you can stretch outside of those limits and encourage them to stretch outside of theirs. It's an important question to ask yourself and not terribly hard to figure out. If you need some more information, you can email me after this and I would be happy to help you figure it out some easier. Another question to ask yourself is whether or not your learning is social or solitary. A social learner likes to process things out loud, right? Like they are not necessarily uncomfortable with making mistakes in public. Whereas a solitary learner likes to take all of the pieces to the side, have that privacy, figure it out, and then they trot out that information or skill after they feel like they have accomplished it. There's really good sides to both of these coins, and most people aren't one or the other. You're a blended mix of these things. For a lot of people, you might feel like you need to take that poetry away to create it privately before you bring it out to show anyone else. Whereas with math, maybe you're the kind of person who likes to process it out loud and figure out how it works. Really have someone as a sounding board to gain that skill. Again, both of these are really valid, but knowing ahead of time how you all work is going to help you with some headaches along the way. The next thing I suggest you do is really take some time to think about what your expectations are, and that your is again plural to all of your family members. So you'll notice on the screen that I have put a column, a section here for the role of the adult. And then I also have a separate section with the role of the child, and I've matched them through colors. In school, you get to have an adult be in charge, in part because there's only one adult and there's so many children. There needs to be more rules to manage that many people in the time and space. But at home, this might not be how it works for you, because with one or two grown-ups, with a handful of children, it can be more flexible. And the rules can be different depending upon which grown-up they're working with. It's all right for it to be malleable. So with the adult as the motivator, I almost called these teachers cheerleaders, because you decide what's happening still, but you end up really trying to motivate the kids into following along. This is going to be great. We're going to talk about this today. And you really hope that they're interested and that they get really caught up in the enthusiasm to participate in it. An adult as a facilitator, on the other hand, takes note of what the children are interested in and then creates a curricula or finds curricula surrounding that interest. You kind of hope that then your students are going to get really involved, and maybe even what else, some new things into, blossoming into existence there. This is really great. What else could we do with this? Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the adult as a general contractor. And this can be a really great way to work with older kids, but I found that I started the seeds of this general contracting with my children when they were quite small. Here are the overarching goals What paths do you see to get there? And you hope that on that the children say, well, I think that we could do this, that I could do this thing. And so I was thinking I would do this thing. And in such, you as the adult get to offer a safety net for them, some experience, and maybe make some suggestions in there about how it could work better. Also, think about what your parental relationship is already like. How are these things going to change because of homeschooling, and do you want them to? Yes and no is a perfectly good answer to this question. But a really wise friend of mine said this to me several years ago. Unspoken expectations are agreements between one person and themselves. If you don't talk to your family members about what your expectations are, without finding out what their expectations are, then that can lead to headaches, some disappointment, and disagreements along the way. Really take some time to talk about these things, because your kids already have thoughts and ideas about how it's going to work. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, and you can fix a lot of things before they become problems. The hard part is deciding. And before we get there, now that we're armed with all of this self-evaluation that we have done, I wanted to give you this Venn diagram, because really you want to find your curriculum or curricula within the overlap of what works for you and what works for them. It doesn't have to be a really intense and new experience across the board for everyone. It's already new. Find where the overlap is in your comfort, and over time, you'll grow into the space that works for them, and they'll grow into the space that works for you. And this overlap will get larger. But to start off, you don't need to invent the wheel. Also, I should say, this is a very simplistic model with just 2 circles in my Venn diagram. You will likely have as many circles as you have people in your family. And while that does complicate things, it also narrows your choices of what your sweet spot is. It's a blessing and a curse. I also want to talk a little bit about this graphic, where I've created a spectra along the idea of adult-led towards children-led. So on the one side, you have school, and we talked a little bit about that and the trappings of why that is adult-led. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have unschooling, and the philosophy therein is that you don't need any of the trappings of school to learn things. In fact, you learn from everything. So the experiences you have cooking, if your kid's really into Minecraft, for example, maybe they're going to be an architect or a computer programmer, or maybe they're going to be a novelist and storyteller, and they're using Minecraft as a place to establish world building and create their stories within. There's a lot of seeds to what the children are going to be as they grow and mature. And those things happen in the here and now. With unschooling, the philosophy asks you to give the children more say in what those seeds are. Now, a lot of you have experience with distance learning, and so you have an idea about how that works. Online institutions work fairly similarly, where they have a teacher that they may or may not interact with through the screen. Oftentimes the parents are asked to be proctors of that information. And sometimes people ask me if this is homeschooling. And it kind of depends on how much work and how much deciding you have in the process. So I like to say that homeschooling is when you are making the decisions, you and your family. Otherwise, if someone else is making the decisions, if you're giving that ability to make decisions to someone else, perhaps it isn't homeschooling. Now, with all-in-one curricula, this is basically the idea where you buy a curricula and then you are the teacher. You are using this a lot like a cookbook. And just like your cookbook, you might make some changes along the way. Let's say that you are trying to build a skill, and that skill has 10 lessons before you accomplish that goal. What if your child does 3 of those lessons and then they have it? Do they need to do lessons 4 through 10? Maybe they don't. Maybe you just do lesson 10 to make sure that they can do the hardest parts of it. And if they really do have it, you can move on. On the other end of this idea is that what happens if you get to lesson 10 and they still don't understand what's happening? You have every ability to go back to the beginning and try again. You can go to YouTube or Google or another source that you find to work, and maybe looking at it from a different way will help them to understand. You can decide what works for you and your family. A unit study is wonderful in its simplicity and complexity. I like to use an example where, what if your kid was really into jets, right? And they noticed that airplanes come in a variety of shapes, and then you figured out what those different shapes were for. And then maybe you talked about what airplanes looked like before that, and before that, and before that, until suddenly you're talking about the Wright brothers, or even taking it back to Da Vinci. Or maybe you're thinking about, what is drag and how does it work, and what are the similarities and differences between this and other natural flyers like bats and birds. Maybe you talk about women in the pilot seat. Maybe you talk about where flight is going and the space race. You can incorporate the ideas of science and math. You can incorporate history and reading. There's a beauty in talking about the same thing from a variety of different ways. You can talk about a unit study for a day, for a week, for a month, or even for a year, if that's the level of interest that you have in the topic. Now, also on this screen, I have included extracurriculars, museum classes, and experiences. It's great when these things can support the work that you're doing that's of an academic nature, but it doesn't have to. They're extra for a reason. With that in mind, I have included on this screen a list of curricula that people that I know or myself have used, and I've put them into blocks of like kinds. So you can see I have distance learning. I do want to give a shout out to these ones in the center, these nature-based and hands-on programs. These are absolutely wonderful if you have someone in your life who is dyslexic or dyspraxic, or maybe you have someone on the autism spectrum. These things are designed to look at learning from a multitude of ways. So regardless of what your learning style is, this could have a good place for you to start. Also, if you're concerned with the amount of screen time, these things are also encouraging you to get outside and really have some experiences. I've talked a little bit about how unit studies work, but I do want to sort of take a few minutes to talk about literature-based programs. And in this, you are learning not just from what you read, but how to think and how to find out information. One of them that's on your screen is called 5 in a Row. And this is a thing that I used when my children were small, but they don't have to be very small in order to do it. Basically, the idea is that you read the same story 5 times in a row, once a day, let's say. And the first time you do it, you talk about what the story is and who's in it. But the next time you read the story, you might take some time to look at the pictures and talk about whether or not there's more information there than there are in the words. You could read it again and talk about foreshadowing. Are there hints on this page about what is happening on the next one? Who's the narrator? Who has the most things to say? There's a lot of questions to be answered in this way, and it can really help the children to develop critical thinking skills. It's a fun way to learn. So the next part is doing, and I hope that it is the fun part. August was traditionally my most difficult time of year because there were so many decisions to be made, and I worked hard at them. But once you have decided, then you get to open up the present that is September, and doing can be exciting and new. But remember, whatever you choose for you and your family, homeschooling is like a cookbook. I like to say that it's like a pot of chili because everyone's pot of chili is different. Maybe yours has corn in it, maybe it doesn't. Maybe yours is vegetarian, maybe it isn't. But everyone makes a pot of chili. It doesn't have to look like your neighbors. It doesn't have to look like your friends. It's going to be different because you are different. Have fun and make it memorable. I'm again going to toggle my screen here. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat window. In the meantime, I am going to next be talking about what homeschooling is really like. The most often asked question I get is, how much time does homeschooling take? Most schools are about 6.5 hours long. What do they do all day? And the truth is, once you take out all of the business of having that many people in a space, taking attendance, sharpening your pencils, passing out papers to 20 some odd kids, the actual time devoted to learning is very low. And you might be surprised how low that is. Now, as you are looking at this graphic, I do want to say that I've taken these data sets from 2 different sources. So the math doesn't play exactly well together, but let me go over it with you. In this central column, you'll see in these black numbers, this is the amount of time spent learning compared to the amount of time they have at school. I do want to say that this is inclusive of the idea of homework. So if your high schooler goes to school for 6.5 hours, and let's say that they do 2 hours of homework a night, then you could expect to compare this up to 4.5 hours with those 8.5 hours spent doing schoolwork. And you'll see on the lower end of this spectrum, where we have the younger kids, they spend 20, 30 minutes a day doing actual learning. And I don't want to say that there isn't important stuff happening at school, because there is, but gaining new pieces is spent just a small portion of their day. Now, the column over here on to the right, where it says 3 to 5 minutes and then going up to 20 minutes per class per day, this is a discrete unit of learning. So let's say you have your kindergartner and you are making dinner. And let's say that you have those magnet letters on your refrigerator, and your kid is hanging out with you there in the kitchen, and they announce that there are 6 yellow letters and there are only 4 green ones. Well, that's a great comparison to make. And maybe you help them line them all up so that they match, and you can see that the line of yellow letters is indeed taller than the line of green ones. And so what you've done is you've made a graph. You've talked about the numbers, you've compared them, and you've given them a representation that's visual on how to measure these things. It's a tool that they will be using over and over again in their lives. It won't take you very long, 3 to 5 minutes, and that's the perfect amount of time. They could practice this on their own, which they probably will do. You can pose new questions, but you don't need for this to last more than 3 to 5 minutes. And if you build together those 6 of those 5 minutes throughout your day, that's equivalent to the amount of time they will have spent learning at school for kindergarten. I do also want to say that there is a lot of data about attentiveness in a variety of ages. And for adults, if you are watching a video on some kind of information and it lasts more than 6 minutes, 90% of adults will have closed that down by the time you get to the 6-minute mark. So here we are. I have been talking to you for about 45 minutes by now, and you have, I hope, maintained your interest in what it is that I'm talking about. And part of that is because I've given you different things to look at and different things to think about. Please use that as a way to have a learning arc for your older children who are going to be having these discrete pieces of learning that last more than 6 minutes. You don't have to drill the same thing over and over again. Repetition is a great tool, but you don't have to repeat it so many times at once. Let that repetition happen later and in the next time you cover this same topic. And with that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what life was like here at my house with my family. Because while the academics, the basic 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, are really important, they're just a small portion of what your day is going to be like, what it can be like. And so I wanted to give you some ideas of what our life was like. This is my older daughter in this photo. She's about 14. And this is my younger daughter. In this photo, I think she's about 12 or 13. And one of the things that we did was I would leave tools of discovery and curiosity out for them to peruse. This one here happens to be a microscope that we picked up at a flea market. We had to clean it up, which was educational in its own way. And then we learned how to use it, how it worked and why. And I just left it on the table for them to use and figure out. So that later when we came to this, microscopes weren't new to them. They looked at everybody's hair. They found out what a split end looked like. They compared our hair to the dog's hair and their friend's hair and curly hair and blonde hair and black hair. Whatever was interesting to them and their friends. They also looked at leaves and butterfly wings and all sorts of things just to have the experience to look. And it created a lot of questions in their life, which we then spent time looking for answers. So it's a pandemic, right? And we're probably not going to be able to spend a lot of times in museums, but there are museums in Connecticut that you can get, that you can buy tickets to in advance, and then they limit the number of people in their building. This one just happens to be at the Yale Art Museum, and if and when these guys open, if you can get a tour with them, the tours are held with master's and PhD students, and it's just really great to have some other person than you, some expert in a field, talk to you about, in this case, art and when it was created and what was that time period like and what influenced this person to create this work of art. If you can do those kinds of things, one, it's really great to have someone else do the talking, and two, it's really interesting and adds a lot to your day and experience. So here we are. We had been studying weather again, and they posed a question: how much water was in snow? So they took one of my larger pots outside and they packed it full, like brown sugar, packed it down inside the pot. And then I was surprised to find that they stood there the whole time and watched it melt. The answer was that there's not a lot of water inside snow, and they got to discover it for themselves. The ideas of curiosity and finding things out the ability to do that really stokes curiosity and the continuance of education in everyone. The thing that kills curiosity more than anything is the answer, I don't know, with a period at the end. Sometimes it works out really great to find the answer out right now. And sometimes you write those questions down and you look up the answers to them at the end of your day, or maybe you save a day in your week to just answer those questions together. The act of answering questions opens up the possibility of asking more of them, and it can be a lot of fun. So here we are in yet another museum, this time at the Yale Peabody. And while, again, we may not be able to go to a lot of museums to take a closer look at history, I do want to say that you have lived experiences, and those experiences lend you to certain worldviews and the ability to talk articulately about those things. You know a lot of people who have different lived experiences who have a lot to offer in that way too. One of the things that we did with our homeschool time was set up a class that I called Living History with our senior citizens at the Senior Center. So for us, we had a group of kids, they ranged in age from 11 to 18, but you could do this with much younger children, their parents, and then again, this group of senior citizens. And we found out so many interesting things. And it started out with where were you when JFK was shot, but it quickly turned into show and tell of things that they had from their childhood and things that were left over from their parents. We actually got to handle a World War I journal written by a soldier in Europe, and it included his poetry. It was exciting to hold those things in our hands, and we wouldn't have had that opportunity except for talking with people that at the beginning we barely knew, and at the end became friends for us. Here we are at another museum, and this is where I want to say that asking open-ended questions is an amazing experience. Here's my younger daughter. She was about 7 in this picture, and I asked her what I thought was a simple question. And what ensued were 10 minutes worth of her talking to me about this sculpture and what happened before this frozen moment in time and what happened after, and who was this person and why was that important. I learned a lot about my kid, I learned a lot about the art, and I learned about myself through the eyes of my kid. And it was a great experience. Learning to ask these open-ended questions can help them to put ideas together. It makes them better speakers and better writers. Find people who are good at things that you aren't. And likewise, share the things that you are good at with other people. I'm a biologist, and so doing dissections is in my wheelhouse. We actually got a box filled with science and, yes, things to dissect, and that happened outside on my patio with a group of friends that we had. You'll notice that we're wearing summer clothes and it's green outside. This is because some people keep their learning to 180 days, but in my family, I call us 365ers, which means that we learned year round. It also meant that I could do the messy, kind of disgusting, smelly things outside when I could hose that down and us down with the hose if I needed, which meant that we weren't going to be dissecting a frog in November on the table I was going to be having Thanksgiving on. So because I was able to share my love of science, my other friends got to share their loves and things that they were good at, and it made a nice community of learning. You might know these people already, and you might spend some time finding them, which begs the question, how do you find these people? I really like the idea of social media, and Facebook in particular, because there is a large community of people out there who are there and ready and looking for other people just the same as you. You can make a post on your local homeschool page. If you don't have one, start one. It will go. There are a lot of people, especially this year, who are in the same boat as you. Be sure to put down the information about who you are and who your kids are and what it is that you're looking for. When you talk to these people, consider some of the things from the pandemic, because you're going to want to share your expectations and find people that really match with you. If, for example, you have someone at home that you're being very careful about, you're not going to match very well with with a family who goes out quite a lot and hangs out with a variety of people. Know your limitations and bring those up at the beginning of your new relationships. So just like you're looking for kids and families, think too about the resources you already have and the people that you already know. Chances are you know some really cool people who do really cool things. And while you might not be able to go to a robotics lab, maybe someone you know can bring something fun to your driveway or bring a smaller experience to the forefront. It's really great. And a lot of times people will say yes when you ask. Let them say no, hope they say yes, and it often works out really well. The library. Your local library is a fabulous place filled with books and media of all kinds. But your librarians are your best resource. They are used to linking information together. And if you say to them, hey, I wanted to talk to my kids about jets, I'm building a unit study, chances are your librarian is going to have a lot of ideas about what else you can include. So I'm going to give Lindsay a minute here so that she can tell you what's available for you at your library.
Yes, and actually it is a perfect time to mention that because the library is looking a little bit different nowadays. If you are Simsbury residents, we are unfortunately not open to the public at the moment, but we still have lots of resources to help you out and connect you with items you may need. We do have curbside running up every day, 6 days a week, Monday to Friday, and then Saturday mornings to get materials from our library, books, DVDs, other items you may be looking for. And just this week, the state delivery system is back up and running on a regular schedule. So you can now order materials from other libraries and have it brought back here like we used to do before all the closures. If you don't have a computer at home or a printer, or you need to send an important fax relating to school or for taxes, something like that, we are open for appointments for those tech services. So we are able to help you out with that. And then we have a multitude of online resources, which we've had before and now we're getting heavily used. In particular for students or for younger and older, we have a couple avenues to get some ebooks that you can read for your pleasure, but we also have databases that are free to use with your own library card. For instance, some of the popular ones are Universal Class and sorry, I just lost my notes. Universal Class and Mango Languages. Mango Languages helps you learn a different language, and then Universal Class helps with test prep or other sorts of skills that you would need to kind of see how your knowledge is. The continuing education courses on a variety of topics, well over 500 different topics. If you have an older child, say in high school, the teen page does have resources for scholarships for once they get past the high school age. They also have teen-specific databases, and that also goes the same for your younger kids. The Children's Room has age-specific resources and age-specific online resources where they can find additional information to supplement or support what you're doing at home or in school. And again, as Linda said, if you ever need help with something in particular, finding reliable information is our job, and we will know exactly where to go. And if we don't, we'll know exactly who to ask.
Yes, librarians have been some of my best resources. Thanks to librarians, I have looked really smart very often, and I enjoy it. So thank you. I get the question all the time about whether or not we school in our pajamas, and the answer is yes. We have done science in our pajamas. We have done history and literature in our pajamas. Some families, they feel it's important to get dressed and that it puts you in the mindset to be active and to learn, and that is fine. It works that way. In my house, it worked the opposite. Being cozy and comfy was a way to ensure that we were comfortable, right? That we could take in the information. However it looks like to you is fine. People ask me sometimes what some of the perks are, and in truth, outside of the pandemic, when lots of people go to work and to school, it leaves the world open and available for us. So we typically spend a lot of September at the beach or at the river, doing a lot of things outside. In this picture, we actually went to go see Black Panther. This is the very first showing in our area. It was a 1:30 afternoon, and so everybody was at work at school, and we had the whole theater to ourselves. Here we are learning about a new to us culture and making new to us food. It's really great to take learning off the page and off the screen. Being able to smell and taste different things really can add depth to what learning means. And lastly, it's okay to get distracted by these little distractions. Jumping in puddles has always been in my family a great pastime. It started when they were so little that their boots came up over their knees, and here they are. They're 13 and 15 in this picture, and I'll tell you that we put our bathing suits on and jumped in the puddles this summer as well. They're 20 and almost 18. The math stuff is going to be there. It's really great to blow off steam, have these moments of laughter, and really enjoy your life. It's arguably what makes it life. Homeschooling is about living your best life, and you get to decide what that looks like. On this particular day, it looked like my little girls in purple dresses covered in mud on the shores of Lake Champlain, and it never looked like this again, but it looked great every day. There were hard times, there were frustrations, but at the end of the day, I never regretted our decision to homeschool, and I hope the same will be true for you. So I would like to say that I love questions. They are my favorite part. If you have any, you can raise your hand, and Lindsay or I will notice. You can type in any questions that you might have in the chat box, and I would be happy to answer them.
I actually have a question, Linda, based on your presentation. So
Yeah.
if someone was looking to get started right now and they want to reach out via Facebook or social media, are there any groups nearby that would be a good starting point?
Yeah, great question. So I like to tout a couple of statewide ones. They're filled with veterans who have a lot of experience. One of them is CT Inclusives. They've been around for about 15 years, and like their name says, they're looking to be inclusive of everyone in Connecticut. Other than that, there's a newer one that's just started up this summer. It's called Connecticut Homeschool Alliance. And this group is particularly interested in helping people see the holes in their choices and then offer ways to fill them. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, someone put up a curriculum that was about Native Americans and also written by Native Americans. And it just helps to have those kinds of resources as close to the source as you can get. These people have a wide variety of experiences. Again, it's filled with many veterans, myself included, for both of these. As for local things, I would suggest that you put in the name of your town and then, into Facebook and homeschooling and see what you get. Again, if there isn't something there, please feel free to start one. Be careful about the information that you are getting, because when everyone is new, you all feel like you're searching and grasping at things. It's nice to talk to some veterans like myself about your experiences and how it works. But still, that's probably your best bet for finding people to homeschool with, which leads me to the idea of co-ops. In non-pandemic times, there's lots of co-ops in our state. The largest one that I was ever involved in was with 105 families, so lots of people getting together. And that's just not going to be something that happens this year for a variety of reasons, tracing their way back to the pandemic. But smaller group functions are possibilities. Again, find people that you are going to be comfortable with during the pandemic. How open and out of your house are you willing to be? Are you only willing to meet outside? That's a good thing to know. What happens if there's inclement weather? Know what your goals are for these meetings, and that's going to help you really move forward and have great experiences.
We did get another question. Do you have any suggestions on teaching children of a variety of ages?
Yeah, so this is a topic that's hot for everyone, right? Most of us don't have twins or triplets that are in the same space. But because the amount of time that we can spend learning, it's easy to overlap those things. Some people create a sort of busy box for their especially young children to help keep them occupied while you're doing more detail-oriented things with your older children. I have to say that, though, that having them in the same space can be advantageous, because there's something to be said for the repetition for the older child seeing the younger child learn, and there's something stretching about seeing the older child learn something. So a story from my perspective: I was working with my older daughter and one of her friends, and we were talking about cell biology. And so I was likening Legos to cells and how you can put these things together to create a larger something. We were going over ideas and how they work and what you could create. And so in that, I then was asking questions of each child in turn. And when one of them paused and couldn't answer, my 4-year-old was sitting across the room playing with something entirely different, and she just chimed up with the answer because she was listening and she knew what it was. They're always learning, they're sponges, and you can allow their learning to be somewhat passive for that kind of thing. It's going to take a lot of different tools, and if you would like to talk about some more ideas that could work for you and your family, I would be happy to have a deeper conversation around those things.
Do you mind sharing your contact in the chat, so that way if someone did want to reach out to you, they would have a way to do that?
I can do you one better, because I actually have a business card, so I'll share this with you.
Perfect, there we go.
The best way to get in contact with me is through my email, or I'm actually on Facebook. You can find me at Wren Homeschool Consulting.
We do have just a couple other separate questions before we wrap up today. You talked a lot about the positives of homeschooling. Are there any negatives to consider?
Sure. You know, there are a lot of homeschooling can be as expensive as you let it be, and it's hard to do when both parents are working full-time. It's not impossible. There are some tools and tricks around it, but it can be hard wrapping your brain around how to make that work. The costs can be, there's a lot of free resources out there, and again, your library has a whole lot of things that you can use, but it really is easy to get caught up in buying the next new thing and this great experience. I always wish that I had access to a teleporter or a time machine, because there are just so many opportunities. Being able to choose becomes like, again, I said August was the hard part, and saying no to terrific things was hard to do. This year, it is going to be really difficult across the board for everyone. The somewhat lack of social, interactions that we have. That's going to be true for the kids who go to school, the people who go to work, and the people who homeschool. This year is completely different than what homeschooling is usually like, and we're all trying to figure out ways to make it easier and better. We're all used to being social creatures. The kids have their friends, the parents have theirs, and everything is going to be slower. I think that that's going to be a hard part this year, especially.
You had actually touched upon the second question, is it possible to homeschool with two working parents?
It is possible. Sometimes we have to juggle our lives somewhat. If you can take a day off to devote and alternate those things. Remember that schooling doesn't have to happen from 8 to 3, right? It can happen anytime. It can happen after dinner if that's what works for you. You can do more things on the weekends if that's what works for you. We're sort of, as a society, tied to this idea of the workday being during the day, during the week. But it doesn't have to be that way. I sort of alluded to this when I said that we were 365ers, which meant that if we only did 15 minutes of work today, we could do more another time. Spreading it out throughout the whole year, spreading the goals for learning out, helps you to time manage a bit better. So you don't have to be done in the middle of June, is what I'm saying. You can, if you want to set your goals to be done by even August 1st, that is totally fine. You don't have to do it all in a rush.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions we had. We do have a couple seconds if there's any other questions that people want to submit. But I feel like your presentation was great today. It really gives everyone a lot to think about, and I'm sure it will be very appreciated in this new environment.
Yes,
that there are
well,
options available.
Yeah, good luck, everyone. And again, feel free. I should have said that I offer one-on-one consulting, group consulting, and I have a class that's going at the East Hampton Parks and Rec that starts next week. So please sign up if you'd like this. It will be 5 weeks, 1 hour at a time of much like this.
Okay.